What's up, humans, and welcome to a new Psicoactivo. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Okay, so I've been trying to get this gentleman back on the show because he was one of the first people that was really kind to give me his time to record an episode when I started doing the interviews in English more than a year ago. And we had a really cool conversation back then. I do feel like I was really inexperienced in many ways. I hadn't read a lot of what I read today. And now I feel like I understand a little bit more of what we spoke back then. And I do have many doubts that I want to ask him about. The next guest is a former editor at Jane's Defense Weekly, and he's also the author of The Hunt for Zero Point, one of the most important books, in my opinion, that talks about the potential nuts and bolts of the UFO topic. And it is rich in history from the times of the World War II. And I don't know if he got an answer writing that book about what this 0 point energy is, but I know that he took a route that has been very fascinating to read in his new series, The Light Beyond the Mountains on Substack. I'm going to leave everything in the description so you guys can check it out, but please help me welcome Mr. Nick Cook back to the show. Hello, Nick. How you been, man?
Hey, Pavel. I'm very well, thanks. It's great to see you again. Yeah, it just reminded me in your introduction how we did have that conversation. God, it was well over a year ago, and
Yeah,
anyway, a lot has been happening since. So it's
yeah.
a real thrill for me to be back on the show.
Thank you. What I want to start with, I guess, is something that I've noticed a pattern with the people that are involved at the top in this. I've heard Dr. Diana Pasolka. I've heard Dr. Jacques Vallée. Sometimes, at one time, you did mention too the word angel in one of our conversations, and I know that Diana Pasolka now is more convinced that at least some of this could be that. And there's a lot of stigma attached to it due to the anti-religious movements that exist. I myself am against organized religion, but I think that this is an interpretation, is it not? How do you see this interpretation of the dichotomy of angels, demons, and in the context of the phenomenon? I would like to ask you that directly.
So I'm going to cut straight to the chase, which is I concluded in The Light Beyond the Mountains, which you referenced in your introduction, a book that I've written fortnightly serialized chapters on Substack. I concluded in that from the data that I was privy to, that I've come across from witnesses, experiencers, scientists, everyone and everything, that we live in a simulated reality. But simulation doesn't describe adequately enough the reality set that we are in. It is something more than that. It's something a lot more than that, because it is fueled by a kind of spirituality which does not describe the sort of the hard-edged sciencey aspect that I referenced when I talk about a simulation. It's more than that. But if we go with this idea that the universe is a system that is computationally driven, that its remit, if you like, is to learn, self-analyze, and grow, then a bit like non-player characters in a game, we are going to be thrown all kinds of exotic symbols that we as nodes of that system, in other words, we as fractals of that source intelligence which drives the simulated system, we are going to have to solve the puzzle, the riddles of those symbols that are thrown at us as these non-player characters in this creative, exotic, godlike game. And because through that creative interaction, the system learns and grows. And I think that is what we are here for, and that's what existence is all about. And therefore, inevitably, we are going to get many, in fact, an infinite set of weird symbols thrown at us in the game, in quotes. And some of those are going to be angelic, and some of them are going to be demonic, if you want to call them that, and everything in between and besides. So it's a bit of a condensed answer to your very leading question, but that's kind of where I am at since we last spoke.
Yeah, I guess that you come really close in a different way to some of the stuff that I read from John Keel, who also thinks that it's like ever changing and the phenomenon is always tricking you. I guess due to the times and a lot of different theories from, for example, Donald Hoffman and Rizwan Burke and what Danny Goller is doing. Have you seen that with the DMT? He sees code when he's shown a laser. That's really wild. Have you seen that?
I've not seen that, but I've heard about it. And yes, I think the sort of DMT experiences actually only just add to this idea that it's simulation based. So yeah, that all comports with my view.
Alongside the work you've done with this simulation hypothesis, I think that you've also been like experiencing everything that's been happening in the US with the disclosure movement. Where do you stand today and what's happened over the last year with all the whistleblowers and people who have come forward? Where do you stand today? Do you still support the movement? Do you think there's fatigue, something like that? Or do you think it's still necessary?
I don't know that I ever said I supported the movement. I mean,
Yeah.
I might have. It's not that I don't support it. I take a fairly agnostic view on it all because my view is that disclosure is not going to come from any one source. It's not going to come from a government. I recently attended the last Sol conference a couple of weeks ago in Italy. And, that was a pretty major theme of the conference, actually, which was disclosure is not going to come from government sources. Gary Nolan and others were stating very openly that, if it was going to come at all, it was going to come through a sort of grassroots popular movement. And that sort of reflects my view, really. I'm not looking to governments to come out with any big statement on disclosure, because I just don't think they will, apart from anything else. But you know what? In all my journalistic training and my background as a journalist, I never put my reliance on any single source of information in any case. And I think in this particular field, that is it's essential. It's essential for me to make any kind of sense of it is not to rely on any single source of information, but wherever you can, try and derive a kind of 360-degree view of, I'm going to say the phenomenon, but that would apply to anything. Any story that I was looking at, I would try and apply a 360-degree view to it, and not to rely on any single source or give weight to any particular sources about, quotes, the truth, because I don't think that's a sensible way to proceed with this story in particular. I think there's a lot of data out there, and I mean, my own view is that you can begin to assemble a fairly comprehensive picture of what is occurring through the data that already exists. You've just got to go and start applying it. And actually, AI, I think, has been enormously beneficial in that if you work with it, you can help make sense of some of the data sets and the patterns that were previously incomprehensible.
Yeah. Speaking of Sol, I wanted to ask you about that. What were your most memorable moments that you could share? Because I know that they're very specific about what you can and can't share yet, but from your perspective, who attended, can you share something that you might have left an impression on you?
I thought that the talks. It was my first Sol for a start. I'd not been to the previous events, so I was keen to formulate some impressions. The first was that this year I didn't think all of the presentations were interesting, but I didn't think any of them were particularly revelatory.
Okay.
There were, but that's not why I go. I used to go to a lot of defense conferences and exhibitions, and again, I wasn't looking for any one particular story when I went. I was looking to talk to people and assemble a picture of a sort of snapshot of what was happening in the defense industry at that particular time. Same at Sol. I was looking to gain a kind of snapshot of where we are, or where this particular story is. And I think a number of interesting things came through. First off, as I said, there was this openly stated theme of the conference about disclosure not coming from any one particular source, particularly from governments, but now being a very grassroots movement. Secondly, there were some interesting presentations, I thought, given by Jake Barber and James Fowler about the whole psionic thing, which I found interesting, particularly given that both of them were giving their perspectives, and they've now, as everyone knows, or a lot of people know, they've sort of split so that you're getting a sort of a view from both of them of what's happening there. And I suppose also I was interested in. Well, here was the thing. There was a Ukrainian delegation there, which was talking about anomalous phenomena over the battlefield in Ukraine, specifically about how they had been tasked by the Ukrainian military with identifying, quotes, drones over the battle space, and trying to discriminate between what was a real technical quadcopter type drone of their own, so a friendly drone. Secondly, an adversary drone, i.e. a Russian drone. Thirdly, a neutral or quasi-friendly drone like a NATO drone. And fourthly, another drone. But of course it's not a drone that they're describing. They're talking about something from that belongs to that other bucket, non-human intelligence. So here is a real world initiative to try and discriminate between explicable material technology in this world and stuff that and phenomena that does not fit with that evidence, and all of that for me in a conference I'd not attended before, I found pretty interesting.
Yeah. When you talk about Jake Barber and the psionics thing, that egg keeps coming to the conversation, the egg-shaped craft. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that specific shape, because as far as I understand, it's been documented for millennia. It's even in some really ancient text. What do you think that represents or could be, because it seems different from all the other ones.
I didn't speak to Jake Barber, so I don't have any particular insights from him. But I go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that if we live in some sort of simulation, then what we are being presented with, the information that we're being presented with, is highly symbolic. And a lot of it should not be taken literally. If I think of an egg-shaped craft, I'm not just thinking, I'm not even specifically thinking, as I should be as a former aerospace analyst or as an aerospace analyst, I'm not thinking about its aerodynamic properties. I'm thinking about its symbolic properties, what an egg actually represents as, something that is embedded, a symbol that is embedded in all of our psyches and is fundamental and foundational.
It's
And
life.
I think that is part of the puzzle that we are being presented with, that this is symbolic information that we, as fractals of the system that is running itself, or the creation, if you like, are being invited to try and interpret and respond to and present the system with feedback to, because from that feedback, the system learns, self-analyzes, and grows. And I think that's what it's all about.
And the whole psionics aspect is part of it too. You have had like a unique front seat to a lot of very interesting people. And when I first started listening to that term psionics, I couldn't avoid thinking about what your experience was with Ingo Swann and John Hutchinson. Do you think that they like tapped into something that we can all tap into if we're really living in a simulation? Do you think we can like manipulate the simulation and manage it at certain point? Everybody could have this ability.
Yeah, I do. And I don't, as you say, I don't base that on my own perceptions. But I do defer to people who put a lot of work into this. You mentioned Ingo Swann.
Uri
And
Geller too.
yep, I spent time with them both.
Yeah.
And I believe that they, I mean, that was Ingo's position in particular, was that human potential is, we've barely scratched the surface of what we humans are capable of, and that the gifts, quotes, that he had were not unique to him, and that they were latent within us all, and that we had to make an effort to uncover them and find them for ourselves. And so, yeah, I think that therefore, in this universe that I'm trying to describe, which is, as we've discussed, simulation based, consciousness is what is, if you like, the source code of this simulation. And we are able to influence the source code of the simulation, in other words, consciousness, through things like intention. And that's not a thought that's unique to me by any means, but very much something that Ingo and others expressed. So, yeah, I think it is entirely possible that we can interact with the game, the simulation, by exercising our minds in new ways, and particularly by forming intentions that somehow ripple through this field of consciousness and connect with whatever it is that we are trying to connect with. And in the case of psionics, we see some fairly extraordinary interactions with orb-like phenomena and UAP phenomena, which I think are very telling, and I think that they deserve rigorous investigation.
Do you think that because the way I see it is that we're not aware, like the vast majority of people in the world are not aware that we are really connected through consciousness. And we are like our own individual selves. Uh, there is an idea that we are like evolving into a certain stage of this civilization. But the way I see the world today, um, sometimes I'm not that optimistic. And I know that it defeats the purpose not being optimistic, but um, there's this talk constantly about a certain threshold that humanity is going to have to face at a certain point, and that it feels closer. And you talk about AI, there seems to be a singularity, like a point of convergence at a certain moment. Do you think that we will be ready if the time comes, and when the time comes? And what do you think is needed to be ready collectively, not just individually,
So, yeah, I mean, like, anyone else, I watch the news, and there's a lot of depressing stuff out there, as
Yeah.
you say, conflict, climate change, rampant AI, runaway AI, all of these things. But I've tried to flip that and go, well, if we're here for a reason, if we are here to work within consciousness, which is the driving force of the simulation, the essence of the simulation, then what these things are, these events that seem, potentially catastrophic to us, they are forcing functions which are driving us, or driving consciousness, to present us with new data. We are being presented with new data. It's scary to us because it's unfamiliar. But I think it is inviting us, as in consciousness, to respond to it in new and highly creative ways. I think in that sense, much as I want to talk here about a godlike intelligence that is benign and seeking to act in our best and highest good, that actually what it's really seeking to do is act in the best and highest good of the simulation.
Yeah.
And so if we are participating in this simulation as avatars, I, Nick, you, Pavel, we are bodily avatars of nodes of the consciousness that is set within this huge infinite game framework. Then we all are feeding data back into the system. And from that data, as I said earlier, the system is analyzing itself, it's learning from itself, and it's growing and expanding. It may be that a disaster or some catastrophe is what the game has programmed for some new kind of learning. I mean, God knows, we all, I hope not, but it's possible. And I think, this kind of came to me the other day, which is, we are so, I think what's the word? Solipsistic. We as a species, we look to ourselves as being the highest expression of intelligence that there is.
Yeah.
But actually, if you think of us in an infinitely wider set of non-human intelligence, we may be speck-like in terms of intelligence in the cosmos, and that this game that we're playing is therefore not for our benefit, much as we'd like to think it is, but it is for the benefit of the system. And a system which incorporates an infinite variety of intelligences, non-human, and So that's the way I am trying to look at it now. And that helps me, in a way, Pavel, get through some of these darker moments.
Existential dread, which happens to all of us.
There you go.
Yeah. And it's by definition chaotic, right? Because I can extrapolate it to my own personal experiences, which are the ones that made me learn the most, are the ones that made me go through a traumatic sort of experience. And I feel very grateful for them. I was very scared when I went through that, but I think that we can extrapolate it to a civilizational situation, you know.
I'm intrigued, but two words you said are really important: chaotic and trauma. So I've within the last couple of months, I've started a new series on Substack following The Light Beyond the Mountains. It picks up on some of the themes of The Light Beyond the Mountains and explores them in great depth. I call it the Outlier series because it looks at a number of things that are outliers. Outliers, as we all know, are some of the data sets that you get on the periphery of a paradigm when it is about to change. So, classically, astronomers spotting Mercury in an orbit around the sun, behind the sun, where it shouldn't have been, gave Einstein the insight into general relativity in space-time. So, and that has defined the science framework, along with quantum mechanics, of the 20th century. I believe that we are being presented now with a whole set of new outliers, all of these paranormal, unusual phenomena, which science has been very reluctant to look at. But that's the pattern of things. Science is reluctant to look at things that don't conveniently sit within its framework. But these outliers, I think, are the wobbling orbit of Mercury equivalent that is paving the way for a new paradigm, a new science paradigm. So those two words you mentioned, chaos and trauma. In the Outlier series, I look at chaos in particular as it is described by entropy. Entropic systems are those that fall into chaos. Where do we see UFOs? Where do we see UAPs appearing? We see them appearing a lot over nuclear installations. What is a nuclear installation? It is highly entropic. It teeters on the edge of massive chaos. If a nuclear weapons detonation is horrendous chaos on a devastating scale. So we not only find these phenomena on in nuclear settings, but we find them over battlefields. We find anomalous phenomena in operating theaters, ER rooms, where people have near-death experiences. So on the one hand, you have entropy and chaos. On the other, you have coherence. Coherence, think of when, for example, a bunch of meditators get together to summon psionically a UAP. That coherence can bring forth an unusual phenomenon. So somewhere between entropy and chaos and coherence, we often find these phenomena. Trauma. Most kinds of trauma, many kinds of trauma, as I've studied them, if they don't defeat the individual, which of course they can do, those trauma can lead to growth, high growth. Yeah. Think of a mental breakdown. The mind after going through this enormous destabilizing chaos, then reintegrates, forms new patterns of thinking, new patterns of behavior, which lead to expansion and growth. So again, I think this is what the system is inviting us to do. It's inviting us, often through trauma, to learn, adapt, and grow. Feed that back into the system, into the network. From the feedback, the system learns, self-explores, and grows. So, yeah, I think those two words, chaos and trauma, are enormously important in trying to understand paranormal phenomena, but the UAP phenomenon in particular.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to ask you about something that I'm sure you have looked at quite a bit, because it's been a worldwide phenomenon at this point. The telepathy tapes and what these kids have been in contact with, and this hill that they go to. How do you interpret that, though, based on the framework of what you've been writing about? Because they seem to be communicating with something, and they seem to have more insights than they're leading on right now. I don't know where that will take us, but it's really exciting to me. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I do, and I did when I listened to the telepathy tapes. I found them impressive. I know there's been some controversy around them, but hey, there's controversy around anything like this that breaks new ground. And I don't have any special particular insights into what's going on. I guess as a former aerospace guy, or as an aerospace guy presently, I am more focused on the UAP phenomenon than I am on other anomalous phenomena. However, having said that, because telepathy is heavily consciousness based, it's a real outlier there. It's another outlier. The evidence to me is overwhelming that it exists, and that, of course, in the framework that I'm tentatively trying to sketch out here, it fits within the pattern, because I need to divest myself of the view that I've been inculcated with since I could learn and understand, that my material body is all that there is to me. It's clearly not. My material body, and particularly in this simulation-based framework, is merely an avatar. It is a non-player character in the game that is being played among whatever it is, 8 billion other characters on this planet, and infinitely more elsewhere besides, possibly. So, of course, I'm going to be limited materially by my avatar, if and my five senses are going to be all that I need to navigate here for my survival. But of course, we do have a sixth sense, and the sixth sense seems to be a residue that is left over from times when we were much more conditioned to experience some of the depth layers of reality than we currently do. Particularly in our super technology driven world as we're in at the moment, we have sort of given up, abrogated our reliance on anything other than our five senses, and God knows some of those we appear to be getting rid of as we head into virtual reality worlds. But clearly, many thousands of years ago, we were more embedded within the architecture of the system, this consciousness driven reality space, than we are today. And I think that we see the residue of that in things like clairvoyance, telepathy, ESP, you name it. So telepathy is a powerful outlier for me, that the paradigm is in imminent danger of collapsing, and we are going to find ourselves within a new paradigm that is consciousness driven rather than materially or material science driven.
Do you remember what I showed you from Bob Grenier?
Remind me.
The guy who talks about the toroidal moments, and he talks about John Hutchinson and the effects of the Hutchinson effect, how they can melt metals and all that stuff. You told me that it had something to it, but I don't know if you looked into it a little bit more. Maybe you didn't have any time though.
I probably didn't as much as I should. I did look at it. I do remember, Pavel, and I remember thinking it did look interesting, and it resonated with certain things that I was looking at. But in my hectic world, I didn't look into it any further. I don't think so.
I do want to ask you about John though, because you really looked into him, and
Yeah.
I think one of the claims is that there is a certain certain bloodlines that react to this type of ability more than others. Did you look into that a little deeper when you looked into John Hutchinson?
I didn't look at that specifically. I mean, John Hutchinson's story, was an interesting one. It formed a key part of my book, The Hunt for Zero Point. The sort of the split surrounding John is that John says, or always maintained, that it was his equipment, his technology, that was generating these anomalous anti-gravitic effects. But others, including Colonel John Alexander, who led an INSCOM, I think, anyway, a US intelligence-based team to examine John Hutchinson in the 1980s. He believed that it was John's mind that was generating the effect and not the equipment itself, or at least the equipment was a kind of peripheral component of it. So I don't know about bloodlines in relation to John. Do you have any information about John?
Based on Bob Grenier's work, because Bob Grenier comes from a family of Freemasons, and he always grew up with this idea that some of the bloodlines in the world have this ability more latent than others, and they have this interaction with sort of the lattice of reality to manipulate it more than others. And that's essentially what they think it happened to John Hutchinson. But I don't know to what extent. I don't know if maybe some of these bloodlines, because, for example, the work that I do on Grimberg, the history of that type of phenomena that he investigated in shamans, it also goes back to a time when there was an ethnic cleansing of the families of shamans. And a lot of that gene, because it is a gene, it no longer exists in many families in Mexico. Something similar happened with Dr. Dean Radin, who investigated this gene, and he correlated it, the absence of it, to the Holy Inquisition when they were hunting people. I found that really, really fascinating. I don't know what you think about that, though.
Yeah, I too came across part of that data set, the Dean Radin part, when he was looking at the prevalence of the gene today, and he found, I think I'm right in saying, that there was a big missing component in Western Europe, particularly because of the Inquisition,
Yeah.
and that, of course, witches were burned at the stake, or those who were perceived to be witches. Inevitably, people at the time who had abilities that were, not normal, or at least perceived not to be normal then. And so whole bloodlines were sort of were wiped out. So yeah, I mean, but beyond that, really, I hadn't looked into it that deeply.
Okay. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the conversations you had a little bit with Jesse when you were his guest, because I don't know what you think about his whole study about Thomas Townsend Brown and the whole time aspect of this. But in the back of my mind, and when I saw that interview he did with Harold Malmgren, I keep thinking that there's some aspect of time. I spoke to John Ramirez too. He said it was time displacement, not exactly time travel. I don't know how much you've looked into this, because I think it's a really interesting avenue. But I wanted to get your opinion on it. If you find it interesting, what you find interesting about it. When Harold was asked about it, he said it's possible that there was some type of time element associated with everything he did. He seemed to have been nudged towards certain directions. And I can't help but think that people like you are nudged too in certain ways. And that's the reason why you do the work you do. I felt some things too throughout my life that brought me to do the podcast that I'm doing right now. So it feels really like sort of preconditioned, prepared, and nudged, as Harold said. What do you think about that?
Well, I suppose I take a rather more a rather more boringly kind of scientific view to it than that, which is I've got to the stage now where I can look through a sort of retrocausal lens at my own life and go, things that made no sense to me at all at the time they happened to me, or at the time these events occurred that nudged me in a certain direction. Those events now make a kind of retrocausal sense, in that I think it's entirely possible that, of course, and I would, now that I'm sort of exploring this simulation type framework, that in a substrate that is timeless and infinite, events in the future can just as easily shape events in my past as the other way around. So, I started off as an aerospace and defense analyst, an editor at a quite prestigious defense magazine. I had a great job there. I really enjoyed it. And then, for a reason I couldn't really explain, I felt drawn to write a story about a heresy in my world of aerospace and defense, which was about anti-gravity. This, 25 years ago, that I really should not have done. It defied all reason and logic. And even as I'm researching it and even writing it, as people will have who've read the book will know, I am saying, this is insane. Why am I following this investigation? Because it is not healthy for my career. And then later on, other things happened. My wife had a shared death experience when her mother died, and I was in the room. It made no sense to me at all. I felt compelled to try to explain it through the only kind of course that I knew, which was to investigate consciousness and its outliers. And that led me then into doing a whole lot of research on consciousness. I then thought, what do I do with this research? Then Robert Bigelow holds an essay competition, which launches his Institute of Consciousness Studies. I win a prize in that, much to my surprise. I then get invited on Robert Bigelow's board to study and help research anomalous phenomena. None of these events were really orchestrated by me. I mean, I don't think they were. Some of them felt quite outside my control. But if I look at it, and they didn't make sense at the time, they really didn't. But now when I look back at them, seeing sort of now where I am, they do make a sense. They make a complete sense. They represent an alternate timeline to the one that I had mapped out in my own mind many decades ago for how I was going to live my life. But and that's fine, because I think that sometimes you have to go with what you're being presented with, and if you close your mind to what you're being presented with, it can, weirdly, I think it can take you off course rather than keep you on it. And I did feel, to your point about nudging, that I was being nudged. I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say by a higher power, but I feel, like, looking back on it, that I was being nudged onto a course that was right for me, that is right for me now. And yeah, that's a long and rambling answer to your question, and I'm not even sure it answered it, but
it's hard to understand sometimes, because these things happen and you go, there's no way. And I'm sure it happened to you multiple times. And I've just been in this for less than 2 years, and a lot has happened already to me. So that's why I want to ask this question to people that I feel are like part of the overall story, which I think you are. Speaking of, though, you spoke about people that you collaborated with and had experiences with. I would like to ask you, do you like remain in contact with people like, for example, Bob Bigelow, Jacques Vallée, the people that are like some of the most interesting personalities in this whole topic? Do you remain in contact with them? What's your experience with them, though?
Well, I saw Jacques Vallée 2 weeks ago. We spoke at Sol, and that was great. I'm a big admirer of his work and the contribution he's made to the whole field. And just as an intellect, I just think he's, an extraordinary presence. So I have maintained loose contact with him, and I hope to more in the future. Robert Bigelow, sadly, the involvement of the research directors who he formed around his institute, the original set anyway, and I was in the company of some really great minds like Jeffrey Mishlove and Jeff Kripal and many others. That, I think, has sort of dissipated. I've not had any contact with Bob Bigelow for several years. And I don't know really. I know that Bix is still going as an entity, but I've not had any involvement with it, sadly. But yeah, I like to keep in touch with all of these people, and particularly, there are others like Hal Puthoff, who I first encountered when I was researching the Hunt for Zero Point. So yeah, I'm not in regular contact with them all, but I like to maintain ties with them and contact with them where I can.
The reason I ask you about them, though, is because there was a recent statement that Dr. Eric Davis made that I found really interesting, because we keep talking about in the field that I'm on, we keep talking about the legacy program and how these people like seem to have been thrusted into something that at first they didn't understand. And some of the people within that legacy program are seeking for the world to understand that they had nothing really to do with the wrongdoing that happened throughout so many decades. And I think that every single one that you mentioned there might be part of this problem, and they're not guilty of anything, but some of them I suspect that might be part of these programs. Eric Davis said that he wanted that he would get if he got a pardon from the president, he would talk about everything. How do you think that situation would play out if it did happen? Because I can only imagine that, for example, Hal Puthoff, he must already have some sort of like a dead man switch, like he already recorded something, like a really long interview where he spills his guts out. How do you think that will play out, though? I would like to get your perspective on that.
Well, I mean, it would be a tremendous shame, in my view, to answer your question in a slightly different way if all of these people who have spent a great portion of their lives investigating the phenomenon were to exit the planet without having left a legacy behind of what they know. Now, I understand why they wouldn't do that, or some of them during their lifetime, because there's a lot at stake. But you, to your point, you would hope that some of these people do have a kind of dead man switch, wherein the information that they have accumulated over a lifetime's worth of knowledge would be imparted if anything were to happen to them, perhaps either naturally or unnaturally. So, I mean, it puts me in mind of the closing talk at Sol, in which the whistleblower Jeff Nuccitelli was talking. He was being interviewed, I think, by Peter Scaffish of Sol, about just such a thing, about a dead man switch. And I seem to remember Jeff Nuccitelli saying that he represented quite a few whistleblowers, and they all had dead men switches in place. So that, I'm sure, is in the minds of the gatekeepers, that these things exist, and that beans will be spilled if anything happens to them. Having said that, I've known people who have left those sorts of legacies behind them, which I've really struggled with. One of the guys was a senior scientist at Lockheed Martin called Boyd Bushman, who I knew quite well. I mean, just from my traditional Jane's reporting days. And, Boyd, at the end of his life, made some pronouncements about stuff that I could not square with the guy that I had known when he was working for Lockheed. So I go back, I suppose, Pavel, to what I was saying right at the beginning, which is, for my part, I don't like to put my to set my store by what any one person says. My training, and I feel comfortable where I'm pulling data from a wide selection of sources to then try and form my own picture about what the truth is, but what to derive a picture that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and although we do have many sources with them, though, there's Kid Green, there's Eric Davis, there's Hal Puthoff, there's even Dr. Gary Nolan, who seems to have been involved in UAP injuries with a lot of veterans. And I can only speculate on what they would say and what they've investigated. I did speak to John Burroughs quite a bit now, and he seems to feel like they do have information about DNA that they obviously can't share because it should be classified. Even John, when I was speaking to him, was weary of telling people about that. So we do have several sources for that, though, and this is coming also from people, let's not forget, uh, who are decent human beings, in my estimation. So it must be really difficult for them to be constrained by those classifications and all that. Oh man.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's me, but I really like to pay attention to what that, if I can call them this, that old guard that you just referred to, has said about the phenomenon. I fully recognize, most of them, if not all of them, having signed NDAs, multiple NDAs during their careers, that they are constrained in what they can say publicly. At the same time, I think they are sufficiently aware of their own reputations not to put stuff out there that is disinformative, if that's the right word. So I tend to listen to them very carefully. That list of people that you mentioned: Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, Eric Davis, Jacques Vallée, Gary Nolan, others, because I think there is a wisdom within them that I recognize and I like to pay attention to. That's not to say that I don't pay attention to other sources, the sort of the newer guard that is coming through. But I think those guys have left a sufficient trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow to be able to derive quite an informed and interesting picture of what's happening out there. So
yeah, and they're also speaking between the lines too, with especially recently, right?
Yes, hugely so. They speak very effectively, in my estimation, between the lines, and therefore learning to read between the lines of what they say is instructive, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Also, something that I did want to touch on with you, I don't know if you, because we're talking about scientists, but there aren't many scientists who are also experiencers, who are out, like out of the proverbial closet, as experiencers. And in recent years, over the last year, we've seen a number of them. Like, for example, Dr. Anna Brady Estevez from the Ecosystemic Futures podcast, and even Dr. Jacques Vallée, who recently in an interview said that he did have an encounter with a sort of like a shadow being. What do you think is like necessary for more scientists to keep coming forward like this? Because I think it's very important for people so accomplished with PhDs and all that to express to everyone, hey, something is happening, what do you think is needed for that?
I meet more and more people every day who are either scientists or engineers who are also experiencers. And then they sort of fall into various different buckets. There are some who don't want to talk about their experiences because they feel doing so would harm their careers or whatever, or they would in some way attract ridicule. There are others who deny those experiences because they can't accept them themselves. Those experiences conflict with their own training, their own discipline. But I encounter them a lot, and I don't know whether that's symptomatic of something that's always been there and is now just coming to the surface, or whether more and more people in the science and engineering disciplines are having those experiences. I haven't done that level of analysis, but it's a thing. And some of those people I'm thinking in particular of some aerospace contacts that I know, at a senior level in engineering disciplines. Some of them have felt that the experiences they've had, particularly in the UAP realm, have been in some sense meant for them. So when they witness something, it's not just that they are a sort of devolved observer from what they're witnessing, but that the thing that they're witnessing is in some sense observing them as well, and specifically them. So it's an interesting thing. I going back to what I was saying earlier, we live in a destabilizing moment in history, and in that zone between entropy and coherence that I was talking about earlier, we appear to be getting more and more instances of these outlier phenomena, these paranormal phenomena, especially in the UAP realm. And the UAP realm one is, for me, is interesting because more than some of those others, I mean, a near-death experience is only experienced by one person at a time. A ghostly encounter might be experienced at most by a few people, but a UAP manifestation can be experienced by hundreds, if not thousands. And we seem to be seeing more of them. I think of, New Jersey, for example. That for me is not patently, to my mind, and I want to be rigorously down to earth about this. So, all of my background is screaming at me. I want these things to be drones up there because I can explain them. But you know what? I look at all of the data surrounding the New Jersey drone set, coupled with more recent appearances over, Copenhagen Airport, Munich Airport.
Belgium is going through something right now, right?
Belgium right now, and possibly the best example of all was Langley Air Force Base a few years ago, because that happened for a good month over one of the premier defense installations in the United States. And officially, no one has explained what was going on there. Do not tell me that, a place like Langley, which is surrounded by all manner of sensors and countermeasures systems, there is no explanation within the experts that look at these things, at whether they're at general level, the rank of general, right down to engineering and scientific minds, that they cannot come up with an explanation that they can discuss with the public about what is going on. So we are seeing things in the skies that are becoming more and more prevalent, but which are inexplicable. And I think that is, again, symptomatic of that confluence of entropy and coherence coming together to produce these signs and wonders that are causing new forms of feedback to be fed back into the system.
Yeah, and it gets really frustrating when people keep saying it's drones. It's like, dude, it's a UFO flap. I mean, it's just like we're perceiving it differently because of the times of technology. But ever since the airship phenomenon until today, it's always like there's always been flaps like this, and they always look different depending on the times. That's the way I see it anyway. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, well, think of the UFO phenomenon itself. It has always been, it's been kind of reflective. It sort of reflects the times. You mentioned the airship wave, but it's also slightly precognitive. It slightly predates the emergence of real world technology. So, the airship wave in America in the second half,
1890s.
the sort of 1890s, was just in advance of airships sort of appearing for real in Europe and, all of that. Likewise, just after World War II, you get the appearance of these sort of cylindrical shapes that sort of mimic the forms of rockets that were then about to appear, always just in advance of what was happening in our material world. Now we have, quote, drones, but they're not drones. I mean, not all of them are. And again, we're seeing a lot of them in places like New Jersey. Is that some precognitive twist on a kind of nightmarish Terminator sort of, apocalyptic vision of our world being overrun by autonomous drones that, are somehow going to police our world? God, I really hope not, but it might just be. We seem to be seeing something that's both reflective and precognitive in our skies.
That's a very interesting idea. I'd never heard of that before. I also think about the black triangles when they started appearing, and then the B-2 bomber came out, right?
Yeah.
Like a little later. Interesting.
Yeah,
I'm going to look.
that's another classic. The triangles were very sort of, they symbolically just predated the emergence of stealth and the B-2 and stuff. Yeah.
That's wild. I've never thought of that before. Last question that I want to ask you, Nick. Well, it's actually two. The first one is next week, I'm going to go to Los Angeles to the premiere of Age of Disclosure. I'm sure you're going to watch it on Amazon.
I am. I'm looking forward to it.
But there's a lot of buildup to this film, and it's been like that for at least 2 years. The first time I started listening to rumblings about it, I saw Commander Fravor and Ryan Graves mentioning it in Ryan's podcast. And since then, I've been digging into what this could be. And then when it came out, it seems like a really serious film. But at a certain point in the initial trailer, there seems to be also this idea that there's a Cold War, there's an arms race for this technology. Many have criticized this angle as it pertaining it to be like some kind of threat narrative that is being pushed. I think it's part of it. I don't think it's the entire thing, I think they also talk about us being a threat to the world in general, and NHI looking at us as potential threats if we get access to technology. I think that's also an angle that we shouldn't ignore. But I wanted to get your perspective on the film in general. What do you think the impact will be? And what do you think about this notion of it being a threat narrative, maybe being pushed or not? Maybe you don't see it that way.
So I can't make a judgment about the film, Pavel, because I've only seen the trailer, like you, and
Same.
I'm just going to hold judgment until I see it. On the threat narrative thing, I think is very interesting because I don't think we should pay undue attention to it, because you kind of have to look at who is speaking. If you come from a culture of secrecy and defense and intelligence, you're going to see things naturally in terms of threat and capability.
Potential threats.
Yeah, potential threat and capability. It's just the way your mind is conditioned to think. Obviously, as the filmmaker, Dan Farrar has to make an editorial decision about the narrative that he's going to pursue. Before I've even seen the film, I can't prejudge that. But what we've seen from the trailer is clearly there is a sort of a threat thread that comes through. But I think that you should see that as a reflection of who is doing the speaking, and a lot of them have just come from that defense, intelligence, infrastructure. I myself come from that background, so I find myself defaulting every now and again to looking at the phenomenon in terms of threat. I choose not to do that. I choose to be kind of agnostic about it, which is why, as I said, I'm exploring this thread more fully in this thing called the Outlier series on Substack, because I want to try and understand it in a new light, not following some of the traditional tropes of the phenomenon and the way it's been analyzed before, looking at it through the, as I said earlier, through that framework of entropy and coherence. Inevitably, though, it would be unwise of me to dismiss the fact that this could be a threat. So, what I currently see or choose to frame as a phenomenon that is drawn to a nuclear power station or a nuclear weapons dump because there is a highly entropic material at that location or in those locations, that entropic material being fissionable, plutonium or uranium that is capable of producing a highly entropic thing, a nuclear detonation. I could look at it through that entropy lens, or I could look at it through a threat lens, which is, no, this is a non-human intelligence that is casing out our capabilities here on this planet, our military capabilities, from the perspective of a reconnaissance mission and operation. It would be, whilst I currently default to the former, that there is a quotes natural explanation for this that is not threat-based, I would be unwise to dismiss the latter possibility, that there may be a threat component to it. So I hold these two things out there, and not quite in balance, because I lean away from the threat perspective, but I can't entirely dismiss it either.
Yeah, we just had James Lakatsky saying that human capabilities will be important at a certain point when it comes to the phenomenon, that we're all going to participate in something. He was very vague about it, but he also said that we shouldn't be afraid of whatever is happening. And this is coming from the man who ran the OSAP program and wrote the Cone of Blue document as well. So I don't know how much credence you give him to that.
I think it's what I said earlier about these very experienced individuals who spend a large portion of their lives examining this phenomenon. I put James Lakatsky amongst them, in that group of others we discussed, Hal Puthoff, Jacques Vallée, Kit Green, etc. We need to pay attention to what people like them say. I find it interesting that he should say we should not be afraid of this phenomenon, because, as we discussed earlier, there is something to my mind that is reflective about the phenomenon. If I present it with fear, I will get fear back from it. If I present it with a sort of benign projection of myself, a kind, loving projection of myself, I will get, chances are, something similar reflected back at me. I'm not making this up. I'm taking this from the data that is presented by the likes of CE5ers, people who psionic practices who indulge in close encounters of the fifth kind experiences. So, and that's what they say. Now I'm intrigued by that statement from James Lakatsky, because one of the things I remember about him when I read, I think it was Skinwalkers in the Pentagon by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp, that Jim Lukatsky's first experience at Skinwalker Ranch was when he saw a sort of a twisting pretzel-like shape, like a hologram, appear in midair in one of the homesteads on the ranch. He or someone else made the analogy, or in describing it, said it looked not unlike the cover of Mike Oldfield's album Tubular Bells. Well, what was Tubular Bells the soundtrack for? It was the soundtrack for The Exorcist, the movie.
Oh.
And now, if you think about the symbolism, in that, and then what was often manifested itself on Skinwalker Ranch, which is some pretty scary shit. It's almost like it's precognitive. Did, in some sense, Jim Lukatsky bring that precognition to the ranch? Did he project something in himself that led the phenomenon to present him with this twisting pretzel-shaped thing that looked like the cover of Tubular Bells? I don't know, but I find it intriguing that he should say we should not be afraid of it, because he probably knows.
Yeah, probably. Oh man, I love this conversation, man. I want to ask you a question from my friends at Living Life Consciously, just so I can let you go. And I want to thank you for your time. Really generous. I hope we can do it again soon. That 3-way conversation with Dr. Jacques Vallée will be really cool. Just putting it out there to the ether. So the question is, what is your biggest hope for the future of humanity?
Well, obviously that we don't descend into chaos completely, and that the situation globally that we're in can be stabilized. But if it doesn't immediately, then to try and take the lesson from that this is in some sense preordained, and that what we are being invited to do is to wake up, and that this is part of the waking up process, that we are being confronted with unusual phenomena that defy our normal reality boxes that we've built for ourselves, and that we are being invited, therefore, to break out of those reality boxes and to acclimatize to a new paradigm. Now, considering the 20th century paradigm, which has given us some wonderful technology, but is failing us when it comes to global challenges like climate change, conflict, and even things like rampant runaway artificial intelligence, I can only hope that the new science, the new consciousness-driven science, is going to be the antidote to all of that and present the world with solutions to all of those very real world problems. So that is, in a nutshell, I guess, my hope.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, so you guys can find Nick on his Rogue Icons series on Substack. You can find him on X as I'm Nick Cook. And I'll leave links in the description for his The Hunt for Zero Point, one of the best books about the topic that I've read so far. And I want to thank you for your time again, Nick. I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Likewise, Pavel. Great to see you. Let's not leave it as long as last time. That was my bad.
Yeah, man. No. We've been busy. We've both been busy. And, you're always welcome here. This is your house.
Thank you.
Right?
I really appreciate it. Great to see you.
Bye, people. You know what to do. Like and subscribe. Take care, Nick. Thank you, man.
You too.